We've been looking at the Battle of Armageddon and a lot of different prophecies that point to that. Tonight, we're going to be heading into and getting ready for the Mark of the Beast message, and then the will of God, which are part of the Battle of Armageddon. So we're going to talk about the beast and the little horn tonight, here with a term called parallelism, and we'll see that tonight. In the Bible, whenever the Bible repeats itself in prophecy, you will see that it uses different symbols, but it says the same thing. And you should be able to begin seeing that in some of the messages that we've looked at, Jacob's time of trouble and different ones that we've talked about. They deal with different people and different stories. So tonight I want to begin a historical journey, and I'm going to take you over to Rome tonight for some travel log slides, because we'll be using those in our presentation. This is the, in Rome, this is the Arch of Constantine, and you can see it there outside the Colosseum through one of the portals. I think there's 80 different entrances into the Colosseum, and you can see that arch out there. And then here's a statue of Constantine, and then a close-up of it so you can get an idea of it. Constantine was a ruler back in about 300, 326. In that era, he was the political leader in Rome, so that he had two factions in his church or his kingdom. He had the Christians and the pagans, and he wanted to unite them together. And so he marched, according to history, he marched his armies through the river, and then he says, "You're all baptized Christians now." And he also had to deal with the fighting between Christians and pagans, and the pagans worshiped on Sunday in their temples, and the Christians worshiped on Saturday, and he wanted to get them together. So he said, "You're all going to have to compromise." So he shut down the pagan temples, and they were about ready to riot. And he says, "Now you're all going to meet in the Christian churches, because we're going to get together as one empire." So he said to the Christians, "You're now going to compromise because I've shut down the pagan temples. I want you to meet on the pagan day that they've been meeting on, Sunday." So that's when the churches transferred over to worshiping on Sunday under this man. It's all documented in Bacchiocchi's book, Samuel Bacchiocchi, From Saturday to Sunday. This is the St. Peter's Cathedral, and you see statue on the top of it there at the Vatican. And I'll take you up on top there so you can see some people next to the statues, and that tells you how tall those statues really are. You get a glimpse of how big they are. They don't look that big. This is a door there at the Vatican that only opens once every 25 years. It has a lot of Bible scenes on it. This is inside St. Peter's. This is a view of Peter, and they believe that Peter was the according to the Catholic Church, he's the one designated to be in charge of the Christian church after Christ. He's the first vicar of Christ, or the one handed down from Christ to St. Peter. So if you go into St. Peter's Cathedral, these are some of the, you see the rays of sun coming in. reminding us of the sun worship from the pagan temples. This is the St. Peter there with the golden crown. Now I want to take you to a different church, the Church of St. John the Lateran. We're standing in front of that church, and I have highlighted in the slide what it says on the outside of the church. It also has it in medallions, in ovals inside, but they're smaller inside the church, of me standing there pointing to it. And you can see that it's written in Latin, and it says, Mother Church of all the world, Mater Ecclesiastum, that's church in Latin, Mother Church of all the world. And when we get into Revelation chapter 17, we will talk more about this, but I want you to remember this slide because that's what's advertised on the outside and on the inside of the Church of St. John the Lateran.
It is art.
Okay, here across the street, when you're facing this church here, if you look off to the right, you will see, and I think I showed this last week, if you look off to the right, you'll see this church. It's called the Chapel of St. Lawrence. You go inside that and you find the Sanctus Scalia. And I think I showed that. There's a lot of people on the steps. You get 9 years indulgence if you up each step on your knees and say a prayer on each step. Okay, let's take a look at the prophecies that lead us up to the mark of the beast message, the beast and the little horn. In Daniel chapter 2, this is an artist concept of what Babylon looked like. You see the river Euphrates going down through the center of town, and you see the bridge across it that was put there by Babylon's rulers. His wife wanted a bridge across that, and it was for practical purposes. You see on the left a little bit across the river, the Escalea. That was the Tower of Babel. It was also called the Escalea. It was kind of the church dedicated to the worship of their god Marduk. In Daniel chapter 2, we're given an outline of history. And Daniel 2, Daniel the king received this vision, and he talks to and explains to the king the vision that he saw. And he said, you, O king, were watching and beheld, and this vision, there was this great image whose splendor was excellent, stood before you. Its form was awesome. Its head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, belly, thighs, and bronze, thighs of iron, and then its feet part of iron and part of clay. And you watched while a stone was cut without hands, which struck the image on the feet of the iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Well, this is a list of the kingdoms. Daniel explains all the different kingdoms that would come up. Babylon, he says, you are this head of gold. After you, another kingdom inferior to yours, a third kingdom of bronze, which should rule over the earth, and then a fourth kingdom strong as iron. And then it goes on talking about the kingdom then would break in pieces all others. And the dates are given to you of the different kingdoms there. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then of course the 10 toes of the statue and the feet. The Rome wasn't overthrown by another power, but it disintegrated into the 10 barbaric hordes, 10 barbaric tribes, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths. This became the Swiss, the German, the French, the 10 nations of Europe. In this particular prophecy of Daniel 2, it's kind of the skeleton outline of world history. But I talked about parallelism. When we look at other chapters of Daniel, it tells you the same message, but it gives you more details with each message that comes along. In Daniel 7, we have this vision. It says, Daniel had a dream and the visions of his head while upon his bed, and I saw in my vision by night, behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring sea, and 4 great beasts came to the sea, each one different from the other. So we have different symbols. And then here is the first symbol. It's a lion with wings. And Daniel describes it. The first was like a lion that had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off. It was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. Well, if you travel to Babylon, actually, this is an actual picture of what's known as the throne room lion. And this is in the Pergamum Museum. I have pictures of me leaning against this and actually touching this. This is bricks that were dismantled over in Babylon, and they were reassembled in Berlin in the Pergamum Museum. If you travel to the Pergamum Museum, you can see this throne room lion. And you see on the side of this lion, his wings. When Robert Coldway, first did the excavating in Babylon, he uncovered a large statue of a lion out in front of the ruins of Babylon. Well, the workers that he was using to uncover things were superstitious, and so they wanted to cover it back up again. Well, that was the symbol of Babylon. And in this particular dream, Daniel is told and tells the story of interpretation that lion with wings represents Babylon. And that's a fitting symbol because that was actually the symbol that was used in Babylon. And like I said, this tile comes from the city of Babylon where Daniel was, and it's now in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin. If you travel to Berlin, you see this. I took the tour in Berlin in Pergamum Museum there. Jeremiah prophesied about Babylon. And it says in Jeremiah 4:7, the lion has come up from his thicket. And that's talking about Babylon. And the destroyer of nations is on his way. He has gone forth from his place to make your land, let your cities will be laid waste. And then Jeremiah 21:7 says, afterward, Lord, I will deliver Zedekiah, king of Judah, his servants and the people, and such as are left in the sword, the famine, into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar the king, into the hand of their enemies, into the hand of those who seek their life. Sword, he will not spare them or have pity or mercy. So here you see in the prophecies of Jeremiah that it's talking about Babylon, the lion, in one of the Jeremiah 4:7. In Jeremiah 21, it names Nebuchadnezzar the king when he came to destroy Judah and Israel and took them captive. And then in Habakkuk, it says, indeed, I am raising up the Chaldeans. That's the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, a bitter, hasty nation which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment, their dignity proceeded from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar, and they fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. So here they're pictured as flying like the eagle. They're the lion that flies, and that fits the symbol of Babylon in Daniel chapter 7, the first beast that rises up. Then it has this interesting detail. Now, it's telling the same thing, but it's using different symbols, and you'll begin to notice that when the Bible does these detail things and different prophecies, it gives more details. In each succeeding prophecy, you find more details. Notice it says the first beast was like the lion, had eagle's wings, and then it says, I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Well, lions don't stand up on 2 feet because it exposes their belly. But it says it was made to stand up on 2 feet like a man. In other words, Babylon became weak. Its wings are plucked off. It wouldn't be aggressive anymore. There would be a time. And then it says a man's heart was given to it. Well, in Daniel chapter 4, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation. Verses 1 through 9, Nebuchadnezzar's confession of God's knowledge and power. And then verses 10 through 18 talk about this special dream that he had about a big tree being cut down and put a band around the tree. And then how in 12 months later, he's walking in his kingdom and he says, isn't this great Babylon that I built? And they watch her, the angel that comes down pronounces sentence on him. And Nebuchadnezzar's fall is talked about, where for 7 years he was out of his mind. I actually have historical quotes that talk about that happening to Nebuchadnezzar. The Bible says he would have his fingernails grow long. He'd have his hair like feathers of a bird grow, and he'd be out with the cattle eating straw. Well, verse 28, 36 talks about that. And then verse 37, Nebuchadnezzar comes back into his right mind and he praises the God of heaven. So one of the details in this prophecy is that the lion stands up on his hind legs and its wings are plucked off. Well, that was the period of time when Nebuchadnezzar went out of his head and they did no aggressive marches towards anybody, and Babylon was weak. Jeremiah talks about that period of weak time, Jeremiah 51:30, and says, the mighty men of Babylon have ceased their fighting. They have remained in their strongholds. Their might has failed. They have become like women. They have burned their dwelling places. The bars of her gate are broken down. So it talks about the destruction of Babylon and how weak it became. And then there's a second beast out of the, it says, I saw another beast like it was like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise and devour much flesh. Well, when Babylon fell, it's talked about in Daniel chapter 5, verses 25 to 28, is the fall of Babylon, where they saw the handwriting on the wall. And then Daniel is called in. He's not present at this drunken feast that takes place. If you read the story in Daniel 5, he's called in and he reads this writing on the wall. And he said, this is the inscription, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The inscription, each word, what it means. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Persian, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Well, if you travel to Babylon today, you will see this large open room. This is the actual room where that handwriting on the wall took place. It was Palace and his festal hall where he had these big balls and gatherings, and people have calculated the size of that room. It says he could seat 1,000 people. Well, that's what they estimate all you could seat in this large room is 1,000 people at tables at this room. So that's a picture from Babylon. Babylon is about 54 miles south of Baghdad. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, I want you to notice some of the details that God has put into this just to make sure we're understanding it correctly. It says, another beast like a... Why does it portray the second kingdom like a bear? It says, arise, devour, and eat much flesh. Well, bears are very vicious. They don't have any preference towards any creature or any person. They're just very vicious creatures. Well, if you look at the Medes and the Persians, the second kingdom, the one that overthrew Babylon, in Daniel 5, it mentions them by name. Here in the story of Daniel 6, when the Medes and the Persians are in charge of the kingdom and they throw Daniel into the lion's den, and then Daniel lasts through the night and he isn't eaten up. Here in Daniel chapter 6, it talks about what happens and what they did to the other people that tricked the king into throwing Daniel in the lion's den. Of course, Daniel comes out doing fine, but it says the king gave the command and they brought those men who had accused Daniel and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. They were very vicious, and that's why it's portrayed as a bear. We had the lion representing Babylon, and I showed you the throne room lion that actually had eagle's wings on it, called the throne room lion, and that was a fitting symbol that God would use in his prophecies for portraying Babylon. The bear represents the Medo-Persian kingdom, and they were very vicious. Here's a quote from Isaiah 13, verse 17 and 18. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, who will not regard silver, and at gold they will not delight in it. Also their bows will dash the young men to pieces, and they have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye will not spare children. They were very vicious, and that's why the bear is an adequate portrayal of that kingdom that took over Babylon. And then notice it says another detail in this particular prophecy. We don't want to miss any of these details. It says the bear was raised up. Well, the reason it's raised up on one side is that the Persians were stronger than the Medes. It was a kingdom made up of the Medes and the Persians, but the Persians were stronger, and that's why the bear is raised up on one side. And then notice it says that it has 3 ribs in its mouth. Look at all the details God pours into this prophecy to make sure we're understanding it correctly. That was the 3 different areas or provinces of the Medo-Persian kingdom: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. That was their 3 provinces. And then there's the third beast that comes up. It says, after this I looked, there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Well, the kingdom that overthrew the Medes and the Persians, this is the kingdom of Greece. And Daniel says these great beasts, which are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth. The 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. Well, does the Bible identify Greece by name? His that the 3rd kingdom was Greece, but does the Bible use the term Greece? It identifies Babylon by name. It identifies the Medo-Persian kingdom in Daniel chapter 5. But in Daniel, it does mention the 3rd kingdom, which is mentioned as Greece. Here it is in another prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 with different symbols, but it mentions Greece by name. In the 3rd year of the king Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. In the vision, so it happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in vision that I was by the river Ulai. I lifted up my eyes and saw standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. Now, just like the bear was up on one side, so one horn is higher than the other. Now notice this is a completely different prophecy and different symbols, but it's telling telling you the same. Mention this kingdom of Greece and give more details. Now, we saw Daniel 2. We're looking at Daniel 7. Now we're in Daniel 8, and we're seeing all these what's called parallelism in prophecy, because all the prophecies say the same thing, but they use different symbols. And then it says, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so no beast could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his great will. And then, as I was considering, suddenly a male goat, a billy goat, came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. Then he came to the ram, which had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and he ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacking the ram, and broke his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So the ram is destroyed by the billy goat with the large horn between his eyes. When this prophecy in Daniel 8:8, it says the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Notice the details. And then it gives us the answer. It says, the ram which you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So the ram is identified as the kingdom of Media and Persia, and it says one was stronger, and then it says the other one came up last. It gave that detail to us. And then it talks about the billy goat. It says the male goat is the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Well, that was Alexander the Great. He was the boy king that had this band of ruffians, and he marched across the world in 10 or 11 years and conquered every army that came up against him. But then the prophecy said that his great horn would be broken off, and it says, as far as the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in his place, 4 kingdoms will arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Well, as for the four kingdoms, when Alexander the Great destroyed all other nations, I think he was 33 years old, he sat down and he cried because there were no more battles to do because he had conquered the world. And then he drank the Herculean cup of alcohol, but he wanted to do it better and bigger than anybody else, so he drank it twice. He went into a drunken stupor because he filled his body with so much alcohol that he died 3 days later. The prophecy came true that the great horn would be broken off, and his kingdom was divided among his 4 top generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Again, fulfilling the details of the prophecy of that 3rd beast that we looked at. Here's the 3rd beast, that's Greece, and it's mentioned by name in Daniel chapter 8 under the billy goat symbol. And it says, though, he had 4 wings of a bird in the leopard prophecy. If you read Daniel 8 carefully, it says the billy goat went across the earth, not touching the ground. That's the great speed at which Alexander the Great conquered the world. I was considering this male goat, and see, there's the detail, without touching the ground. That was Alexander the Great and his band of ruffians that conquered the world. And I looked, and there was the 4 wings of a bird. It had 4 heads. Well, it has 4 heads because his 4 top generals took over after he drank that cup of Herculean cup of alcohol twice, went into the drunken stupor, and died. And then it says, after this in night visions, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, and had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Well, according to the Bible, in Daniel 7:17 and verse 23, it says the four great beasts were four kings that will rise out of the earth. Now, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. Nowhere in the Bible does it mention Rome by name, but we know that it mentions Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, and the next kingdom that came along and destroyed Greece was Rome. And the legs of Daniel chapter 2, if you'll remember, were made out of iron. And in this particular prophecy that it talks about this great beast, and I'll put him back on the screen, it's the nondescript or the ugly beast. He has huge iron teeth. So the iron legs and the iron teeth. And in Daniel chapter 2, you have 10 toes. Well, on this fourth statue, you have 10 horns. And so here it says, just as you saw the toes were part of baked clay and part of baked iron, the kingdom will be divided kingdom, so the people will become a mixture, will not remain united any more than irons with clay. So notice the parallel here on this particular slide. You've got the same thing being repeated in Daniel chapter 2, when it mentions Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And you have the same thing in Daniel 7, where it mentions the lion, the bear, the leopard beast, and with the four heads and the wings. And then the ugly beast, or the nondescript beast, has 10 horns, just like the statue has 10 toes. Okay? Now here's the identifying signs of this little horn power. In Daniel 7, verse 8 and 24, this little horn that comes about in Daniel 7, it rises to power after the other 10 horns are in place. So this little horn power has to rise up after the Battle of Padin in 196, when Rome wasn't conquered by another nation, but just disintegrated into the barbaric hordes. In Daniel 7, verse 8, it says it rises to power among the other 10 horns. So that means this power, the little horn power, has to rise up in Europe, because that's the 10 nations or the 10 horns. And then it plucks up 3 other horns by the roots. It would destroy 3 kingdoms on its rise to power, and that actually happened. We're going to talk about that next week. And then its mouth would have a mouth speaking pompous or blasphemous words. We're going to be looking at blasphemy in the Bible, the biblical definition. And then it rises to power out of the fourth beast, Rome. So that would be another detail of the prophecy. And then would be different than other kingdoms somehow. It would persecute the saints of the Most High. It would think to change times and law. And according to Daniel 7 in the prophecy, the saints went into his hand, this little horn power, for a time, a times, and a half a time. And that prophecy talked about several times in the Bible, and I'm going to go through great detail. But these are the identifying signs of this little horn power that comes into being. In conclusion, as we talk about the beast and the little horn, you have to remember that when Jesus came, it says he was in the world was made through him, the world did not know him. Sometimes people don't know about the details of these prophecies, but that's why God gives all the details to make sure we're accurate. We want to receive Christ and the message he has in the Bible for us, not be like it says that Jesus came to his own and his own received him not. They didn't receive it. So as we study this and we look towards the end of time, next week, if we talk about the mark of the beast, I'm going to go through these details and give exact description and fulfillment and show pictures of how all of this was fulfilled. We want to be willing to receive the prop God has for us, because it does tell us more about the events to come in the great battle of Armageddon that we've been discussing and talking about. And we have several different details of that prophecy left. Okay, so I'm going to close early tonight with this slide, because I'm going to run long next week when we get into the mark of the beast. This week, we talked about the beast and the little horn, kind of setting the stage for building up in what's called parallelism, because in Daniel 2, we had the skeletal outline of history: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. In Daniel 7, we got more details, where they started to give details about different kings and when they would arise and how they would be made up and who would be ruling them. All those details are in Daniel 7. Then we looked at Daniel 8, and Daniel 8 even gave us more details. It gave us the name of Greece and Alexander the Great, the first king. Well, when we jump next week into Revelation 13, it's also a parallel prophecy, but it will give more details that we've gotten from Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and Revelation 13 will give more details and get more specific about God's prophecies towards the end of time, between the seal of God and the mark of the beast. And we will be talking about that next week. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so that we can close our service a little bit early. And then next week we'll run our service a little bit long as we get into the details of the prophecy of the mark of the beast. So let's bow our heads together as we close our service tonight. Father, we're thankful for the details that you give us in the Bible. We thank you for the accuracy of how you portray different kingdoms, and going out of your way to portray them in symbols that make sense, like the lion for Babylon and the bear for the Medo-Persians, and all the different things, and how you repeat yourself over and over to make sure each one of us gets the message and the details and the importance of these prophecies to tell us about your soon coming. We ask that you will bless our lives as we study your word and mark our Bibles. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.